What's up, folks? Khalid Bey. The discussion on tariffs versus taxation. What's the better approach? What is the potential impact on the American citizen? Is it realistically unfair for a single person to amass wealth or not? Are we truly being objective, or are our biases impacting our judgment? This and much more we're talking about today. Let's get to it. Let's talk. All right, welcome to Let's Talk. Khalid Bey.
It's Rob Romeo here.
And today, I was just watching on the news. The president had two victories in Supreme Court today. One of which is very interesting. The Supreme Court ruled in his favor to implement the Aliens Enemy Act and the removal of persons who are here unlawfully.
We talked about that. We did a nice segment on that, and we said it's going to be a crazy couple of weeks, and it has been. Now we got these detainees in El Salvador at one of those prisons. They showed a lot of footage of the prison and stuff. It's remarkable. We're talking about in this prison in El Salvador, they can hold up to 40,000 prisoners there.
Wow!
But it is but for the country of El Salvador, it's a very good thing they look at, because they're getting those people off the streets. The gangs off the streets, and they're getting their. You have to have safety before you can have democracy, or before you can have your freedom.
That's sure.
So, but these 80 or so people are down there, and the Supreme Court, as you said, did uphold his use of that act, which is kind of strange. But it is what it is. However, what you won't see on right-wing media, or a lot of the media, is the real holding of the Supreme Court was 9-0 that said that these detainees cannot be deported, cannot be detained without due process.
Right. They have to be allowed the opportunity to protest.
They have to have a day in court.
That's right.
Whether they're illegal aliens or not, whatever, they have to have some due process. They have to have a lawyer. They have to have somebody representing them, and they have to be in front of a judge to determine that you are the person that's being charged.
That's
You're not somebody else. It's not a mistake.
Right.
And you did the thing that they're charging you with.
Right.
And they have to charge you with something.
So right, we can be comfortable with at least a little bit of checks and balances there.
Well, here's the thing. Like we said last time, it's still up in the air about these 80 people, or about anybody in the future, whether this administration is going to abide by that. Are they going to call El Salvador and say bring them back? Or can we do it remotely? Or how can we get these people their due process at the Supreme Court when everybody knows that they should have?
Yeah.
Or and then for future ones, because they're going to ramp it up now, they're going to try to do more.
Yeah.
Are they going to just ignore that and deport them anyway?
I think that's the concern. I think the persons in El Salvador is one thing. I think it's all the future potential detainees that's going to be probably a bit more alarming, even though they're obligated to allow each person due process.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how that goes. This is a hell of a weapon that's been controlled a little bit, at least in theory.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a weapon. Right.
So,
and last time we used it, as we talked, they came back 50 years later, or what was it, 40 years later, and said, you know what, that wasn't proper.
Right.
It wasn't a proper use of that
That's
act.
right. That's right.
So what will happen in 10 years from now, or even in the next administration?
Well, and that's the tough part, because the damage would already be done.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then we end up paying, restitution.
Well, this is of course the idea of a Supreme Court and a Congress, because you can't leave it to a single person or a single small group of people.
Yep.
So you would hope that, similar to them obligating, the White House and ICE and everybody else, that these persons have legal due process, that they would equally put similar protections in place for some of the other measures that they're taking.
No, I agree. One of the things I'd like to see covered more, or just analyzed, is what is the cost per person too that we're spending?
Oh, it's expensive.
I mean, it's beyond expensive. You have this Doge thing and the cutting of government waste abuse and all this. How much per person are we spending, and using the military flights and everything else that they're doing to deport these guys? Not to say that you shouldn't do it if they're actually violent criminals, but isn't there a way to do it more efficiently? Less expensively, isn't there? Or is this military buildup of the ICE and so forth, is that more performative, just a show?
I think it's both. I think it's performative for sure. I don't know if there's a more efficient way.
I don't know.
To remove a lot of people.
I don't know.
I don't know if there is. It's an expensive undertaking.
Yeah.
He'll probably try to get the other countries to pay for it through tariffs.
Get on the tariffs, right?
Yeah.
So here we are. Boy, today the market bounced up a little bit, and after the 2 or 3 days of really 5% loss or whatever in the market, trillions of dollars gone out the window. But then it went back down again. Now it's down, so it's 3 or 4 days in a row. It's been really bad.
I still stick to an August recession. It's too volatile right now. And you pay attention to some of the more financially savvy guys. I always keep an eye on Buffett. Usually when he stops buying, it's probably smart to not do anything.
Well, he got out before he got out for a little while. This is what I heard.
Took all of his sold all of his Apple stock. He dumped everything. Has basically been sitting. So and here you have now we mentioned this prior to the camera being on, that at some point, I can't remember the exact year, but we can certainly research it now, but there was a concerted effort to continually push the responsibility for funding government onto the citizen. It ultimately happened, and so here we are now, where the citizen arguably pays about 99% of the cost for a government operation. And you have this administration who is claiming to want to go back to the federalist type of effort, where they push the responsibility for our funding on the many people who, as Trump say, may owe us more than they've been paying us.
In theory, yes. Through the tariff program.
Right. And so, I mentioned that a little bit of devil's advocate on my part, because I see the logic and the argument back then. But I equally see the logic in your argument that it has a lot of consequences, to attempt to do it now.
Right. Well, I mean, if you look at it trying to balance the budget or trying to get government revenues through tariffs, it comes through, the average citizen by paying, a surplus on the goods that are purchased, and that becomes really somewhat of a regressive tax, because the people with the less money have to still pay for the goods and services.
That's right.
So it disproportionately affects their income and their ability to get ahead, versus an income tax, which is based on your ability, your income. So your income goes up, your tax should go up, or you're proportionally you're paying more taxes. But I think this group of administration, economists, they want to get as low taxes as possible, especially for rich people. And they want to put more onto the tariff side. And I disagree with it, but that's the game plan, and it's no secret that's the game plan. That's what they've been after for 20, 30, 40 years. This is the kind of thing that they look at.
I think the tough thing when I look at the current state of the person who may not have the best economic condition, right? So you have a moderate to low wage. You have a taxation, averaged at what is it, 10% on the first 20,000 and 12% on the next, but it's average out about 22% tax bracket. And then you have, of course, inflation, high interest rates, and so they're in such a squeeze, in terms of their ability to make things work for their family. It's very tough to see, even in our current condition, a way out for people.
Right. I mean, the answer, the best case scenario is you have a low tax and you have low inflation, so that you have more money, disposable money. The economy is doing really well, and you got low inflation, low interest rates. Keeping the tax down low, below that 30% or 40% is tough. That you're right. That's where, when you realize that after tax dollars you're dealing with, not before it. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I think that the effort should be more on the lowering inflation, lowering an interest rate side, and also, keeping the taxes lower for lower income people, and lower income, or moderate income people. Biden was looking at $400,000 a year. Maybe you make that $1 million a year, and you keep that tax low. The other thing I've never really thoroughly understood, or the pros and cons of it, is like a flat tax, which I think there was a presidential candidate years ago, back in the Reagan era, or afterwards, Steve Forbes. He was a proponent of the flat tax, which is like a 10% tax on everybody, everywhere, and I want to see how that plays out. What the problem with that is, because I don't see that there's a problem with it. It seems
that seems probably the most fair thing I've heard.
Yeah, well, it's a flat tax is 10%, and really where it comes from is it's biblical, because it's
10% tithes. Gotcha.
That's it. It comes from that. So and I think that there's a, like, it was like a certain amount should be for real estate, a certain amount should be for investment, a certain amount for savings, and 10% for taxes.
Yeah.
And if that's the way people organize their finances and their lives, it's a good balance.
Right.
But we haven't got to that point. But there was some effort to it. And I maybe we should revisit that, especially because of how things are really being upset right now with the tariffs. Maybe we should start to revisit the tax structure, the tax code.
We'd like to hear your opinion, not only on the Supreme Court ruling in regards to the Aliens Enemy Act, but also the position on tariffs or not, and what would arguably be an impact on you and many other people at the grocery store and similar things. But let us know what you think. Leave a comment, say something. Tell us what you think, so we can talk about it a little bit more.
So with the pushback movement started, and we see millions of people. That's a number, millions of people across the country, and in cities all over the country, protesting now. And so, what effect is that having, and how can it be improved? I got some ideas. How about you?
To your point, I was thinking about it earlier. Under the auspices of making things better for people, even for people who voted for this administration, a bulk of them have lost their jobs now. Families may not have means to provide. The
reduction of the federal workforce, which not just the personal level of the person that gets fired and laid off. That person's a viable member of the community that's going to the restaurants, that's buying goods and services, and paying a mortgage usually, or a rent. And now. Where are they? They're on the unemployment line someplace, collecting unemployment. So what's the trade-off there for our government? That's not a good trade-off. And then on the other side of it, the services that they did provide, the services that they did provide are lacking now. So when you're going to make a phone call to go someplace, or you want to go to the National Park Service, or you want to, you need some help from Social Security, or need some help with Medicaid, are the services there? FEMA, what's going on with the flooding right now in this country, and is FEMA staffed up to date, and NOAA getting ready for these storms, and all this stuff is going to have a not a positive effect. I would say
no,
extremely negative. And and I feel so much for the individual federal workers, who do the things all day long. And there was a story of one. There's a million stories, I'm sure, if you get out there and interview these federal workers. There's someone that invented something while he was on his job that, it just got used by the organization or the agency that saved lives or did this or did that. You're not get paid extra for that. You don't get a patent on that.
Right.
You're just a federal worker that did doing your job.
Yeah.
So this is really kind of a tragedy, but there's as you said, there's a pushback that's coming, and it started. I think it'll grow. I think the tariff thing now is going to grow, and I think the key is, there's a couple things. I have some difficulty with the way it's rolling out. It's kind of ad hoc, or it's just kind of organic, which on that is good, but then it doesn't have the impact that necessarily you want to have. One thing I'll say, I'll just tell you some negative things that I'm thinking. When you watch these protests, and this is what we're protesting, or the administration, or what they're doing, and you look through the crowd, and there's a sea of crowd, and then you may see 5 or 10 Palestinian flags flying. Maybe you see one American flag here and there. You can't have tens of thousands of people and 10 Palestinian flags flying in this situation. I think I love the Palestinians. I love Israelis, Balak, etc. But the Palestinians' protest should be against Hamas, and it should not be against this administration. And by the way, if you look at probably the numbers and the results from the exit polls from the last election, probably the majority of Palestinians voted for Trump. And now here they are, aligned with these pushback protests. So Palestinian flags are fine. I think that provides a negative situation that detracts from the message. The other thing in general, they come up with this hands-off thing. You heard that, right? There's a hands-off, the economy, hands-off, they're just hands-off. That, again, doesn't have a very positive impact to say hands-off. It's not just we want hands off. We got to stop the madness, or do something more aggressive than say hands off. It's just, that's almost like a Me Too kind of thing. It's like, okay, that had its movement, its day, and it's still viable and still important, but that and the LGBTQ flags and the Hamas flags and the hands off, that's not where the majority of Americans are with this protest. And so that should not be the face of it, or front and center.
That's always been the case, though, where you have special interests, if you will, or particular interests will kind of usurp the message or usurp the stage.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, or maybe not so interesting for those who did not read that document, they're also planning to eliminate the right for protest.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's coming next. And so the more they see these protests, they're going to have some response to it.
Yeah.
And the response is going to start to be that permits, they're going to claim there's some violence, and there's going to be some violence. It could be. I mean, we hate to see that, but as we talked last week with our Kung Fu master, we don't want that.
No, we don't want that. No, it's the thing is, I think that I've voiced this before, right? And I think this is the struggle with the Democrats right now. I saw on the ticker there while we were talking, what will the Dems do?
This is what we're talking about.
Right? And where are the Dems now? Right? And so we see a lot of protests, generally from people. We see a lot of protests in government. What I haven't seen is an alternative plan.
To do that, I think you need some leadership, and you need the people like a Schumer, for example. We need to have think tanks that come out and write and organize what the plan is. That there's plenty of very, very bright mindset in the Democratic Party of where this country needs to go, but it needs to be organized in a plan. a project like Project 25. Be organized. That took them 30 years to do.
Yeah.
But we need to get started with where this country needs to go, how it can be improved, how it can be better. So put our better minds on that. And then we need our better messengers to carry that message.
Yeah, those are interesting terms.
Right.
I'll be honest. I'm not sure who the better minds or the better messengers are.
I'm not. We can throw some out. We can talk about it.
And the thing is, like, it's tough because for as long as there isn't an alternative, they're going to keep their foot on the gas.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
And merely saying that won't work, which is ultimately being said by persons in Congress and in the Senate, it's not adequate enough, because they're not following it with, here's an alternative. We'll go back to the point about Schumer. So if the Dems are looking at the situation realistically, what would have to happen is a real consideration of their argument absent the politics. The reason why I say that is because when you're automatically assuming the worst, you don't really give it due consideration. It becomes very hard for you to make a valid argument to discredit if you haven't actually looked at it.
Yeah.
And then if you have in fact looked at it, I'm sure some of them have, but if you have in fact looked at it, there's some things there that you can't deny.
Well,
And so it would require you to say, okay, we see your point here, we see your point there, we see your point there. We'll come on board with that, but we need these things to go.
Right.
We need to substitute these things, and that's the part that's not happening.
No, but I guess the way it's being rolled out is you have to take it all, and we don't care what you have to say. Right? That's it. But I think if they get to the point where they go to them first, say we agree with something. Maybe they can find something they can agree with, and they can go to them and say, look, we're the opposition here, but we do agree with this aspect.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's right. That's right.
So let's work together on some of it. And there are some things out there. There behind the scenes there are some Democrats and Republicans working together. We don't hear about it, we don't see it, but there are.
Well, the antagonism makes for better TV.
Yeah, of course. Anything negative is better to throw out there than anything positive.
TV.
But we have to get that's got to come more to the forefront. And it's got to break through at some level with something positive. I don't know what it's going to be. If it's going to be this big tax reduction for the rich, I don't think it's going to be that. But there's got to be some pieces of it that they can agree with.
The 10% tax is interesting.
Yeah, you like that one.
That's interesting.
I went back to my Steve Ford days to read that in the Bible. I guess I remember.
Unfortunately,
that's a Bible thing.
It's decent. Like my position. Like I'm gonna be honest. I'm not mad at the fact that some guys have amassed wealth. I don't know how they got there.
Yeah.
Right, but I'm not mad at the fact that they've amassed wealth.
I am.
What would be problematic to me is if they stopped everybody else from doing it, which in some instances the circumstances does.
I don't.
Right, and so I mean, like it's just like being mad at Carl Lewis or Usain Bolt for being so fast. Right, we can't say you can't win all the races because you're the fastest guy in the world. Let somebody else win. That's not realistic, right?
No, I agree with all that. And there are some people that have truly gotten there through their hard work and dedication and intelligence and so forth. There's the vast majority more, though, that either inherited their wealth or they've gotten off the backs of others, and so then here they are. I do think, though, at some level, if you're not philanthropic, how much money does one person need? Does it become a moral issue? I think at some level it might.
I don't know, because I think it's all relative.
Yeah.
I think it depends on who you ask, and one thing I say which won't be popular with people is, and this is me as a person who's not wealthy, but losers always call it wrong, right? That's wrong, and the winners always call it right, so I think it's I think it's relevant in that respect, and I don't know that. I think it's a moral debate to say whether you can say what Rob can do with his actual talent and his earned profit.
Totally.
So it becomes a sticky situation because
you gotta
where does it stop, right? And so
at what point does it stop?
Right. So I can't say, oh, I know exactly how some of these guys have earned this ridiculous amount of wealth, or I could say, man, it was genius, and most of the population are consumers.
Yeah,
and they prefer ease to labor, and so they'll buy from you instead of making it themselves.
One other pet peeve about that is that the idea of the self-made man, the self-made person, I made my millions and I deserve it. It's all mine. I think when you have to look at, there aren't any truly self-made people, because if you have a business, you have employees, and those employees did some work for you to grow your business to make it profitable because they were good people. You were smart enough to hire the right ones, but that's one thing. The other thing is just the government itself, the society that you live in helped make you the way you are. You didn't leave your house and get to your job without traveling on a road paid for by the government. So
by the taxpayer.
By the taxpayers.
Right.
By the taxpayers.
Right.
Everybody else. It's what I'm saying is society.
I can agree with one particular thing implied there for sure. That when you talk about the CEO versus the employee, and the wages are not adequate, right? And so they built their wealth by drowning the employees.
In the 90s, the CEO was like 10 times maybe the value of the average C-level employee or employee. 20 years later, it's 300 times.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
300 times, maybe more now. That's too much.
I can agree with that. It seems it's more beneficial from my perspective that if people can actually have a real livable wage, right, and have a real shot. I tell people all the time, you should always work with the intent to fund your own operation.
That's good. Right?
And because it keeps you motivated and work doesn't become dreadful.
You got to take care of yourself.
You got to take care of yourself, and so, but you have to have the ability to do. And the circumstances have to be equally adequate to allow for that kind of growth. Right along with that is the proper education for how finance works, which most people know how to spend money, but they don't know anything.
There should be, in high school level, there should be a basic economics course about how do you live off, how do you budget to live in the middle class.
That's the key word.
And we don't have that.
No.
We don't have that.
Most people don't know how to budget.
No, how to live in the middle class.
That's right.
How can you afford a mortgage, a car, gas for the car, heat for the house, that kind of thing. People don't understand how to budget for that.
It's a tricky subject, man. Certainly worth an adequate amount of debate. It is tricky because I will use the same analogy. Whether you're talking about somebody to go after for money. Now, again, the unfair practices which we can certainly assume and in some instances validate have taken place for people to build wealth, right? It's not like the unfortunate circumstance where the girl was losing in the relay race and hit the girl with the baton, right? And so, if we saw Usain Bolt tripping people along the way, then we would say that his win was unfair, right? But for the ones who may have, it's a big quotes on may have, Rob, gotten it honestly, which I'm sure many people are twisting their mouths when I say that.
They completely on their own.
Right, completely,
no such thing.
Nobody got it on their own. You need customers, right? You need workers and the like. But I, as a creative guy who is a fan of creative culture, who respects service culture, I understand that if an economy is going to thrive, creative culture has to take the lead.
It
has to. Otherwise, everybody will be hungry and broke.
We got to get after the tax structure. We got to reduce the taxes somehow. The burden.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yep. So let us know what you think, Rob. Final words.
I'm here. We got to find that beauty and grace out there. I know it's there. We'll keep looking. This one, Hakeem Jeffries, go for it. You heard us. You heard it here first.
That's right, Hakeem. We're gonna need you to take charge in D.C.
Let's go right now.
Let's whip this ship in order. Clip Bay.
Rob Roman.
Let's talk and catch you on the next one.